Okay, hi friends, and we're going to go on here, and with the Treatise on White Magic, and actually, um, we've already done this. This is my mistake. 5.8, I think, was completed. Let me just check this. Okay, it looks like 5.7, 5.8 is completed, and we're involved with 5.9. Which means the ninth program in chapter 5. So I'm just going to correct that, as I should. And I want, again, to deal with this business of service. The factors that a master is looking at, we are discussing. The first factor was lighting of the lamp, the dealing with the downpour, the stimulation from the soul, the light in the head, the alignment, the usefulness of the disciple, because certain interior adjustments between soul, mind, and brain are in process. The second was the various types of karmic factors which affect the individual and his fitness for entry into a master's group and for the life of accepted discipleship in affiliation with the master's group. And then the third factor of service. And it's so good, that I'm recalling, from my studies in the arcane school long ago, that sections from this section of white magic were used in the lesson sets and were prominent in that which was presented for the student's consideration. So the third factor, that of service for which the master looks, is one upon which the aspirant has the least to say and may very probably misinterpret. And then, all these things that masquerade as service, spiritual ambition, the desire to function as the center of a group. We can see how these magnify the personality in the eyes of the aspiring individual. The longing to hear oneself speaking, teaching, lecturing, again, self-reinforcing the lower self, or writing, are often wrongly interpreted by the aspirant as service. I mean, that they may have a serviceable content, of course, is true, but what is the motive? The master looks not at a worker's worldly force or status, not at the numbers of people who are gathered around his personality, but at the motives which prompt his activity and at the effect of his influence upon his fellow men, fellow human beings. So this word, motives, should be accentuated. It's always appearing, isn't it? Motives. And the effect of his influence. Because after all, we're trying to get something done. The master's trying to advance the objectives, effect of his influence, upon his fellow men. The master is trying to advance the objectives and purpose of his ashram. So, really, when an individual interacts with his fellow human beings, what is the result? Are they inspired? Are they led to further spiritual development? Or is it somehow a retarding or binding effect? And then this definition of what service is, something that really is one of the key statements written by the Tibetan. Service is the spontaneous outflow of a loving heart and an intelligent mind. It is the result of being in the right place and staying there. So many people, says Master Moria, run away when the messenger is at the door. And they always imagine that the grass is greener on the other side of the fence. So sometimes just the restraint of dealing with what has to be dealt with in the immediate surroundings is required. It is produced by the inevitable inflow of spiritual force and not by strenuous physical plain activity, running around serving. That would reduce the service to a lower form of energy. It is the effect of a man's being what he truly is, a divine Son of God, and not by the studied effect of his words or deeds. A man being what he is, being what he truly is. A server gathers round him those whom it is his duty to serve and aid by the force of his life and his spiritualized personality, and not by his claims or loud speaking. In self-forgetfulness he serves, in self-abnegation he walks the earth. That is the abnegation of the lower self in preference to the strengthening of the radiation of the higher self. And he gives no thought to the magnitude or the reverse of his accomplishment, and has no preconceived idea as to his own value and usefulness, though such things may begin to dawn upon him. But it's not preconceived. It is flexible and changes according to his observation and understanding along the path. He lives, serves, works, and influences, asking nothing for the separated self. Well, surely that is something conveyed which has real value and could be read with frequency and pondered with frequency to see, are we truly serving? Or is there some masquerade occurring which inclines us to think that we are serving, but in fact our influence is not inspiring, radiatory, uplifting, and so forth. It is rather self-emphasizing, self-exalting. Well, we came here to the end of video commentary number 43 and the beginning of number 44, Rule 5.9 and page 189. I want to just go back here for a split second. No, it's not quite a split second, is it? It's accumulating the seconds. I just want to see whether I did this correctly. So that was 5.7, 180 to 184. And this is, hopefully I find it. Well, I know I'm just not sure. I'm just not sure. Let's see. 184. Hopefully. Yeah. Okay, that's 5.7. And is there another one? 5.8, 184 to 189. Okay, now we're cooking. 5.8 and now 5.9. This is where I unfortunately waste a little bit of time, but okay. Onward. When a master sees this manifestation in a man's life as the result of the awakening of the inner light and the adjustment of his karmic obligations, now these are the first two requirements, then he sounds out a note and waits to see if the man recognizes his own group note. On this recognition, he is admitted into his own group of co-workers and can stand in the presence of his master. And this is another way of describing acceptance by a master. So, 3 factors: the awakening of the inner light, the adjustment of karmic obligations, and then the response to the master, followed by a peculiar form of service in relation to the master's objectives. The response to the master is followed by service which is in accord with the master's objectives. Okay. All right, so we've completed that little section. And now we have this question of the heart, thus of the heart, the throat, and the eye allied for triple service. Later, when the knowledge here conveyed is assimilated, the aspirant will come to an understanding of the true meaning of the heart, the throat, and the eye, which it is the effect of the guides of the race to stimulate into functioning activity at this time. Okay. Well, okay, and interesting that the large head center is not considered here. The great head center. Okay, let's go back here and get this properly done. Okay, so the large head center is not considered as part of the overall stimulation of the many. But anyway, the heart, the throat, and the eye. The heart center, the throat center, and the center between the eyes. We will consider these, their awakening and coordination, and to what uses they will be put in the coming world cycle. Okay. This subject is of vital importance to the modern aspirant, for the mechanism of the heart, the throat, and the eye, constituting part of the inner structure which he must learn to use deliberately, willfully, has to be mastered and consciously employed by him before any true creative work is possible. Right motivation, right creativity, right destination, guidance, setting the creation upon the proper path using the Ajna center. So these 3 have to be mastered before any creative work, real creative work, true creative work, he says, can be accomplished. When I use the words creative work, I'm speaking esoterically and not referring to the valuable work done by the artists of the world in their many lines of expression. There is a kind of creativity which is associated with the 4th ray and the 7th ray, let us say, the 2 practically artistic rays, and that associated with the throat center and the 3rd ray, the ray of creative intelligence, as DK calls it, which creates that which will carry and promote the divine plan. So when I use the words creative work, I'm speaking esoterically, and I'm not referring to the valuable work done by the artists, etc. Their efforts to the seer are indicative of an inner stirring, of an inner coordination and a motivated activity which will lead to true esoteric endeavor and to creative work on the subtler planes. So artistic creativity seems to precede what the Tibetan is calling creative work in this context. But of course, you know, the very highest of the artists do carry a tremendous power from the higher planes, and the future of art will depend upon the kind of meditation which the Tibetan discusses in Esoteric Psychology 2 in the urge to the creative life. That is the section. I am assuming in the student an elementary knowledge of the vital body and its force centers. And I am assuming that these 7 centers or lotuses have theoretically, at least, a place in his imagination. I use the word imagination with purposeful intent, for until there is knowledge and clear vision, imaginative assumption is a potent factor in bringing about the activity of the centers. Okay, so we want to use our tool here, the creative imagination, to stimulate the centers. And we'll just put that down as the idea that imagination is used in stimulating and directing the centers of force, the chakras. Okay, so let us, for the sake of clarity, list these lotuses with their petal numbers and their location. This is also found, you know, in a Treatise on Cosmic Fire. I think what's said here is imported. Their colors are immaterial at present from the standpoint of the student, for much that has been given out is erroneous or in the nature of a blind. And in any case, the esoteric colors are widely different from the exoteric. So he is detaching us from overmuch color consideration. So at the base of the spine, 4 petals. In the next dispensation, maybe it's in the 5th round, there will be 5 petals. So the numerology is important, but right now we're dealing in this 4th chain and 4th round. Maybe it will be the 5th chain before the number 5 appears there. But here in the 4th chain and 4th round, 4 petals. The sacral center, 6 petals. The solar plexus center, 10 petals. The spleen also, which is minor, has 6 petals. The heart center, 12 petals. The throat center, 16 petals. The center between the eyebrows, 2, and I want to add or 4 or 96. Different ways of counting, you know. The subsidiary aspects can be added up to 96, and maybe with the 2 major ones, 98. And the 2 petals themselves are divided into 2 parts each, kind of a blue and violet and a yellow and a rose. Yellow and rose together, blue and violet together. And the head center, 1,000 petals, or maybe we should more properly say 972 or 960 plus 12. But, you know, for convenience and impressiveness, I guess, it's called the 1,000-petaled lotus. Now let the student remember 2 important facts, which may be regarded as elementary and preliminary, but which nevertheless have to be worked out into conscious realization and become part of the purposed intent of the aspirant's training. Okay, conscious realization. Always, that which is theoretically presented must be consciously realized. This we understand and work towards. It is easy to generalize. It is difficult to realize. Okay, well, there is something that might serve as a cautionary mantra for so many of us. I certainly take it to heart. It is easy to generalize. It is difficult to realize. Okay. It is simple to grasp the informative intellectual data regarding the centers of force. It is most difficult to bring about the rearrangement of the forces flowing through these vortices and to learn to function consciously through the higher centers, subordinating the lower ones. It is most difficult, not just difficult. So, we have the presentation of the task, and then we have to labor through that which is presented until it is accomplished practically. It is simple to grasp the informative intellectual data regarding the centers of force, and I'm sure many of us have done that. But how many of us have brought about the rearrangement of the forces flowing through these vortices? You know, it's kind of like reversing the wheel in a way. They have to move in new directions, and new stimulations are necessary. Sacral to throat, solar plexus to heart, base of spine to the 1,000-petal lotus, and to learn to function consciously through the higher centers, subordinating the lower ones. This is a hierarchical process. We are hierarchicalizing the chakra system and seeking to function mostly through those which are higher. This has to be done also without laying the emphasis upon the form aspect, as is the case in many practices used to vitalize the centers. So we can become overly involved in the material sense if we are not careful. So we do not want any rematerialization of the consciousness in the effort to arouse the centers. Okay, two facts which are of importance here. So he's making a basic discrimination, and you notice here that the diaphragm was included as a dividing line. The torso is divided into two parts. The head is separate, but then there's the upper torso and the lower torso, then the arms and legs. Man is a 5 in many respects. I suppose the organs of generation are still part of the torso, but the sixness may enter and suggest descent into matter and reference to the sacral center. So there are 3 centers below the diaphragm: base of spine, sacral center, and solar plexus, and it's a 4, 6, and a 10. So that's 20. The sum here is 20. 4 plus 6 plus 10. And that's got to be significant for, whoop. Okay, come on now. My cursor jumps. 4 plus 6 plus 10. Okay, which are at present the most potent in the average humanity and the most alive, and they require to be reorganized, reoriented, and brought from a state of positivity into that of negativity. So their positivity is a controlling factor, and their eventual negativity will mean that the higher chakras are now in control. Equally, there are 4 centers above the diaphragm. It's rather interesting when you look at the planes, you know. Here, let's just say we'll go to wherever we are here. Okay. I'm hoping that I seem to have done something here which is not entirely desirable, but there it is. If we go back to this map, which is a little more readable, we see the 4 above the 3. Here's 4, the cosmic ether is above the 3. The cosmic dense physical planes, really subplanes and subplanes. Okay, 4 above the 3. Well, notice the chakras. It's the same process, isn't it? The 4 are above the 3. The higher 4 above the 3. So I'll put that down. 4 are above the 3. And this is archetypal. So we have the 4 centers above the diaphragm, and he's moving from the center immediately above the diaphragm, the heart center, to a still higher center, the throat center, the center between the eyebrows and the head center, which is complex and has in it, various parts. So these must be awakened and brought from a state of negativity into that of positivity, and this is this whole process, from the astrological point of view, is called the reversal of the wheel. It's an energy reversal, really. We do not look for any zodiacal kind of wheel being reversed. Sometimes a man is born in the next life in the sign opposite his present sun sign. In what way then is the wheel reversed? Which way is he going? We don't know, unless we do know. So the reversal of the wheel has to do with reversing the energy flows, which at first render the lower chakras positive and the higher negative, and then later, upon reversal, the higher chakras positive and the lower chakras negative. Okay. So the awakening from a state of negativity into that of positivity, and this has to be brought about in 2 ways. First, by the transference of the positive energy of the lower centers into that of the higher, and secondly, by the awakening of the head center by the demonstration of the activity of will. The centers in the head are higher correspondences to those within the other parts of the etheric body. And there comes a time for the man when the stimulation of the head centers will assist in the awakening of the lesser centers, of which these head centers are higher correspondences. So the transference is a big deal. And about that we know something at the first initiation from the sacral to the throat, at the second initiation from the solar plexus to the heart, and starting at the third initiation but continuing into the fifth, the transference from the base of the spine to the highest head center. So first there is the factor of transference. We'll make that noteworthy. And then there is the awakening of the head center and its various parts. The head center may well be triple, well, at least double, let's say that. There are the centers within the head, but as the Tibetan head dresses seem to suggest, there's a whole series of centers above the head. And maybe they are the highest of all. DK has said that the lore, the knowledge regarding the head centers and the head center as a whole, that lore is very esoteric and has not really been given out in its completeness. So anyway, there's transference. And the first effect there, I suppose, is the building, character building, and by purification of the bodies as used by the soul in the three worlds. You know, we're told from darkness to light, from the unreal to the real, from death to immortality. You kind of wonder whether you could associate darkness to light with the first transference, in a way, from the sacral to the throat. Certainly from the unreal to the real, we are dealing with the solar plexus, with which much glamour is associated, and the heart center, with which the light of intuition is associated. So the true reality, as seen by the intuition, is achieved when that transference is completed. And the death of immersion in form at the base of the spine center, the power of which holds us in incarnation all the way to immortality, as promoted or provided by the head center. And there are two others, as you know, chaos to beauty, and from the individual to the universal. So character building is the first result of the transference, and by the purification of the bodies as used by the soul in the three worlds. And the second is the result of meditation and the development of organized purpose influenced by the will upon daily life. So let's just say that what is obvious here, meditation awakens. It's always that way. Meditation awakens the head centers. Head center. Okay, HCS, head centers. Let's do that. HCS. We'll make a plural out of it. Head, as there are quite a number of head centers within the great head center. HCS. Character building, clean living, controlled emotional reactions, and right thinking are the platitudes of all religious systems, and have lost weight from our very familiarity with them. So, these are the issues of the path of probation. It is not easy to remember that as we live purely and rightly, we are verily and indeed working with forces, subjecting energies to our needs, subordinating elemental lives to the requirements of spiritual being, and bringing into activity a mechanism and a vital structure which has hitherto been only latent and quiescent. So energy changes accompany right and pure living. That's the main point, isn't it? Energy changes accompany this attempt to live with a good character which is helpful to the group and not harmful to the group. Nevertheless, it remains a fact that when the energies latent at the base of the spine are carried to the head and are brought via the solar plexus, that clearinghouse of energy, and the medulla oblongata to the center between the eyebrows, and that's, important hint showing us how the medulla oblongata is involved. He throws that in quickly, but it's there, and it tells us the route of transmission. Then the personality of the matter aspect reaches its apotheosis And the Virgin Mary in the individual sense, which is a finite parallel of an infinite reality, is carried up to heaven, there to sit by the side of her Son, the Christ, the soul. So here in the allegory are some very technical occultism delivered through an allegory. Right.